Imagine declaring total victory over the world's most critical maritime choke point, basking in the glory of an imaginary peace deal, only to have the actual gatekeepers of the strait publicly announce that you are entirely delusional. When the superpower that historically underwrites global maritime security resorts to governing by digital fiction, how safe are the very supply chains that dictate your daily cost of living? If the geopolitical reality of the Middle East is being actively fabricated to meet an expiring domestic timeline, what happens when that fragile illusion finally shatters against the cold hard steel of naval blockades? Is the global audience being fed a carefully orchestrated geopolitical sedative? I am Lin, and welcome to the Lin Directive. Today, we are stripping away the relentless political theater to reveal a desperate superpower cornered by its own legal deadlines, forced to manufacture a phantom triumph in the Strait of Hormuz, all while the true regional players silently and firmly hold the physical keys. Indeed, the physical reality of the Strait of Hormuz cares little for the digital declarations echoing out of Washington. This narrow artery of water, a mere 21 miles wide at its absolute tightest point, acts as the undisputed jugular vein of global energy. Every single day, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil pulse through this treacherous channel, representing over 20% of the world's total petroleum consumption. It is a geographical choke point where raw, unyielding naval power dictates the flow of the global economy, not social media proclamations. Yet, the United States administration recently orchestrated a profoundly surreal public relations campaign, unilaterally declaring the strait completely open and claiming a historic, flawless diplomatic victory. The actual gatekeepers, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, had fundamentally altered absolutely nothing. The standing operational reality remained completely unchanged from the very beginning of the conflict. Commercial vessels navigating these contested waters must still adhere strictly to Iranian designated maritime routes and secure explicit clearance from local authorities. Furthermore, the persistent, ironclad blockade targeting American and specific Allied vessels was never lifted. The United States essentially threw a lavish victory parade for a maritime peace deal that existed entirely within its own digital echo chamber. When the superpower historically responsible for underwriting global maritime security begins confusing its own press releases with physical control of the oceans, the very foundation of international trade begins to visibly fracture. Consider the staggering historical cost of managing this specific waterway. For decades, maintaining dominance over Hormuz required the permanent forward deployment of the United States Fifth Fleet, utilizing multi-billion-dollar carrier strike groups and thousands of personnel, just to project a semblance of hard deterrence. Today, that immense physical footprint is being startlingly substituted with rapid-fire, frantic keyboard diplomacy. Dozens of triumphant messages were broadcasted to the world within a single hour, openly congratulating European allies, thanking Gulf states, and claiming that the Iranian naval blockade had been spectacularly broken by pure American diplomatic resolve. But look at the water itself. There is no new bilateral treaty. There is no verifiable withdrawal of Iranian fast attack craft or the dense network of coastal defense cruise missile batteries lining the shores. The conditions for safe passage remain dictated by the very regional powers Washington claims to have subdued. It is the geopolitical equivalent of painting a doorway onto a solid, reinforced concrete wall and loudly declaring the fortress open to the public. You can announce your freedom to walk through all you want, but the concrete remains fiercely unyielding. When an established hegemon attempts to govern a 21 million barrel a day energy artery through sheer narrative willpower, it is not projecting unassailable strength. Rather, it is helplessly broadcasting its own terrifying detachment from material reality. Furthermore, while Washington relentlessly broadcasts the illusion of a sudden, miraculous peace, the physical ground tells a chillingly different story. The United States administration hastily claimed that a comprehensive ceasefire was materializing between Israel and armed factions in Lebanon, coupled with an assertion that a massive $21 billion asset unfreeze had successfully purchased Iranian compliance on uranium enrichment. Yet, the sheer scale of active military mobilizations completely obliterates this digital fantasy. Israel has maintained the mobilization of roughly 300,000 heavily armed reservists, actively shifting dense armored divisions toward the volatile northern border. Across that very border, a sophisticated network of subterranean infrastructure houses an estimated arsenal of over 150,000 rockets and precision-guided munitions. You simply cannot dismantle a deeply entrenched, multi-generational military apparatus with a flurry of optimistic social media posts. The disconnect between the proclaimed narrative and the undeniable reality became glaringly obvious within hours. The announcement of a Lebanese ceasefire was met with profound confusion from the Israeli government itself, revealing a complete lack of coordination. Simultaneously, the Iranian Foreign Ministry and regional naval commanders systematically dismantled the American narrative piece by piece. They publicly reaffirmed that the rules of engagement in the region had not shifted a single millimeter. The conditions for maritime transit remained fiercely localized. Full compliance with regional military routing and the explicit, continued barring of American and specific Allied vessels. To enforce this, the local naval forces continue to deploy swarms of fast attack craft and coastal missile batteries. For context, defending against even a fraction of these asymmetric assets costs the United States millions of dollars per interception. Bleeding resources in a war of attrition that digital diplomacy completely ignores. It is a stunning display of strategic dissonance when the supposed architect of a historic peace deal is publicly contradicted by every single active participant on the battlefield. Attempting to command the volatile geopolitics of the Middle East purely through aggressive online declarations is like trying to extinguish a raging thousands-acre forest fire by simply unplugging the smoke detector in your living room. The alarm may stop ringing in Washington, but the flames inevitably continue to devour the physical landscape. The administration is essentially negotiating with a phantom, shaking hands with its own reflection, while the real stakeholders actively fortify their combat positions. When a global power resorts to hallucinating treaties to mask its eroding influence, it surrenders the actual chessboard to those who deal in steel, geography, and hard power. Peace manufactured in a vacuum is merely the prelude to a far more devastating collision. Consequently, to understand the sudden, frantic surge in fabricated international triumphs, one must look away from the treacherous waters of the Middle East and focus on the ticking legal clock inside Washington. The grand theater of digital diplomacy is not driven by shifting regional dynamics, but rather by the uncompromising constraints of the United States War Powers Resolution. Enacted in 1973, this legislative mechanism mandates that any unauthorized deployment of American military forces into hostile environments faces a strict, unyielding 60-day expiration date, with the current operational timeline rapidly bleeding into its 50th day. The political architecture sustaining this intervention is on the verge of total collapse. Maintaining a forward, deployed naval posture of this magnitude is a financial hemorrhage of staggering proportions. The daily operational cost of sustaining a single nuclear-powered carrier strike group hovers around $8 to $10 million, drawing heavily from finite defense budgets. When you multiply that by the dozens of escort destroyers, specialized logistical vessels, and thousands of personnel required to project power across the Gulf, the financial math becomes entirely unsustainable without congressional backing. Historically, when domestic legal deadlines loom and political capital evaporates, administrations are forced into chaotic phase, saving foreign policy pivots. We have seen this exact playbook before, manufacturing a dramatic superficial victory precisely when the legal mandate to fight evaporates, allowing an administration to repackage a legally mandated retreat as a strategic triumph. The current deluge of celebratory messages is merely the sound of a superpower desperately attempting to declare victory before the 60-day buzzer forcibly ends the game. The panic is palpable. If the conflict is not declared over by the deadline, the administration faces the humiliating prospect of legally mandated withdrawal or a bruising, likely unwinnable battle for formal congressional authorization. Thus, the narrative machine works in overdrive, weaving a fictional reality where adversaries suddenly yield and complex, multi-decade geopolitical conflicts are resolved overnight. Deploying aggressive social media campaigns to mask a retreating military footprint is akin to a stage magician utilizing cheap pyrotechnics to distract the audience while the actual floorboards collapse beneath his feet. The blinding flash of a declared victory may hold the public's attention momentarily, but the structural failure remains absolute. A global superpower cannot sustain its geopolitical architecture on borrowed time and fabricated truces. When the legislative stopwatch finally hits zero, the digital illusion dissolves, leaving behind nothing but the stark, unforgiving reality of a rapidly shrinking global reach. Ultimately, when terrestrial dominance begins to fracture under the weight of its own contradictions, the immediate political instinct is to forcefully direct the public's gaze toward the stars. Confronted with a rapidly deteriorating geopolitical reality in the Middle East and a suffocating, fast-approaching legal deadline that threatens to expose a shrinking military footprint, the United States administration has abruptly pivoted its messaging. The domestic discourse is suddenly saturated with grand theatrical promises. Returning astronauts to the lunar surface, aggressively planting the national flag on Martian soil, and even ordering the defense establishment to declassify sensitive files regarding UFO phenomena. This is not a sudden renaissance of human scientific exploration. It is the deliberate deployment of the ultimate geopolitical smoke bomb. Consider the staggering financial dissonance required to maintain this dual reality. The current iteration of the American lunar exploration program already commands an estimated budget exceeding $90 billion, with projected Martian ambitions poised to drain hundreds of billions more from federal reserves. Simultaneously, the United States is quietly incinerating tens of millions of dollars every single day just to maintain a precarious, heavily contested naval posture in the Gulf, a posture that regional adversaries are actively rendering obsolete By abruptly shifting the spotlight to deep space and extraterrestrial mysteries, the administration attempts to replace the grueling, increasingly unwinnable metrics of physical warfare with the boundless, unquantifiable metrics of science fiction. If the state cannot functionally secure the 21-mile width of the Strait of Hormuz against local fast attack craft, the calculated political solution is to simply promise the conquest of a planet 200 million miles away. This dramatic strategic redirection is a profound, albeit silent, admission of vulnerability. When a historical superpower finds its traditional hard power firmly checked by asymmetric regional forces and rigidly constrained by domestic legislative clocks, it predictably seeks refuge in spectacle, declassifying UFO documents and making astronomical pledges serves as a dazzling, high-budget distraction carefully designed to pacify an increasingly anxious domestic audience and flood the news cycle with irrelevant noise. It is a desperate attempt to project unassailable, futuristic strength, while simultaneously managing a very present, highly embarrassing terrestrial retreat. Deploying narratives of extraterrestrial encounters to mask the erosion of physical global influence is exactly like a failing theater director, setting off blinding fireworks in the rafters simply to distract the audience from the actively collapsing stage below. The explosion might be visually spectacular, but it does absolutely nothing to repair the shattered foundation. When an established hegemon must literally summon phantoms from the cosmos to conceal its shrinking footprint on Earth, the era of unquestioned terrestrial supremacy has already quietly drawn to a close. Therefore, when a hegemon substitutes social media declarations for grand strategy and UFO declassifications for genuine statecraft, the balance of global power is not just shifting. It is actively being rewritten by those who quietly hold the physical ground. The illusion of absolute control is cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. If you found this breakdown insightful, share your thoughts below. Are we witnessing the final, desperate stages of an empire built on narrative, or just another calculated distraction before the storm?